Hi, this is Regina White Favors with Favors Film Analysis. So I want to extend the strategy case study for reviewing the town. This is more or less a critical thinking opportunity. And I want to look at assessing conflict with the narrative, conflict with the characters, the way that robbery cinema is depicted. So this will give us an opportunity to think about how the director, Ben Affleck, presents conflict, how he acts within the narrative as a main character named Doug, and his relationship with James, as well as the other characters. And this will also just gives us an understanding, an opportunity to reach an understanding about just the presentation of heist movies, the presentation of robbery cinema. So this is Favors Film Analysis, assessing conflict in the town, which showed in theaters 2010. And you can visit www.favorsfilmanalysis.com for more access to critiques and reviews. All right, this presentation is subject to fair use. So the opening scene, Doug is the leader. He's considered the leader. But this scene also establishes conflict. What you see here is Doug initially in voiceover talking about how they are now going to rob a particular bank, and the cash truck um, security people, one is sitting in the truck and the other is coming out, bringing the money and delivering it to the bank. And so what you hear is in voiceover first, and then we get a picture of all the four men in a work truck. And so Doug goes into this discussion about um, the height, the age of the man, how much he makes, and what the strategy would be if they are confronted with the police. The problem here is James is off to his right, and just as Doug says um, that no one has to get hurt, just shoot at the engine of a cop car, James says, well, if he wants to get hurt, we're not going to get in the way for a person who makes $10 an hour, $110 a day. I mean, yeah, $110 a day. What you see here is that even though Doug is considered the leader, and we see the FBI agent Frawley actually label him as the architect, there's conflict in the narrative, or that is being presented in the narrative, that James opposes Doug. Even if Doug has command of the room, somehow James opposes Doug. And even if you are a leader, sometimes that you being a leader automatically establishes conflict, even if your goal is not to establish conflict. So what you see here in this pic is essentially Doug setting out the plan, setting out any contingencies, and expecting the other three men in the truck, and including himself, to come up under that leadership authority. He's not the only leader in the film, but this particular this conversation that he's having, and James opposing without saying I'm opposing, is the conversation that establishes conflict with between Doug and James. So now we're actually in the bank, and the men have come in to rob the bank, and you see that Doug here is in the skeletal mask. We don't know that initially, but when you hear his voice, you know it's Ben Affleck's voice. And so there's a connection being made here without intending to make a connection, but it's going to also create a conflict, because even if he's asking her to open the vault, um, the conflict in this situation is a conflict between her values as the assistant bank manager and wanting to protect the bank, because when he asks her about what time the vault is available to open, she says 9 o'clock, but Doug says no, it's 8:15. So she comes into frame as a person who believes in rules, or believes in supporting whatever vision that she has for her own life. And now you see Doug like a disruptor, affecting how she now sees the world. And so they are making a connection because it's obvious he has to talk to her in order to guide her through the process of opening up the vault, because she's scared, her hands are shaking, she almost wants to cry. And so he puts his hands on her hand and tells her to basically slow down, take your time. That alone is making a connection, even if it's a bad connection, a negative connection. But him putting his hands on her and she responding in kind so that she can get the vault open is a way of conflict that will reveal itself later, especially when he tries to court her. He tries to develop a relationship with her. And so there's some distance here, but he cuts through the distance by putting his hand on her hand to guide her to opening up the vault. So we see her laying down. Her name is Claire. She is considered the victim in this particular situation, along with all of the other people in the bank who are being held hostage. And what she's doing is watching conflict. It is almost like she's having almost a bird's eye view of the conflict, even though she's on the floor. And with her being on the floor, it affects her perception of the person who just had his hand on her hand, trying to guide her to open up the vault. And so as she looks at Doug, she maintains her own position, and you'll see later that she's she's going to push the alarm button with her foot. So she's maintaining, no matter what, who she is as an individual, what she's going to contribute to this situation, which is a conflict, because they're hoping that when they come into the bank, it's going to be a situation where they can get in and get out. They don't want to get in, have issues, have struggles, have conflicts, and then be forced to commit to another action. So even as a victim, she's almost empowering herself in um, in being the one to set off the alarm. So she's watching conflict at play. Her ears hear as well. All of the other people, the bank personnel and staff who are sitting with their hands tied behind their backs are also watching conflict. But it's important to think about Claire and how she views conflict in this particular instance. So they have taken her hostage, and they tell her to walk until she feels the water on her feet. So it's the walk, and she's standing in conflict. Her conflict, when they take her hostage away from her comfort zone. Her comfort zone is the immediate place where she is, which is the bank. So in that comfort zone, she walks about as an assistant bank manager. She gives leadership. She assesses situations. She knows the ins and outs of where she is. When she has to walk across this field to get to the water, and she's tied, her hands are tied, as well as um, her face is covered, her eyes are covered. This is her standing in conflict because it is different from what she is accustomed to. We don't get a backstory on Claire for how long she's been working at the bank, but we know that she hasn't walked this type of path before in order to feel the pressure of where she is. She also references later that when they told her to walk until she felt the water on her feet, she says that she thought she was going to walk off a cliff. And when you are not accustomed to any type of particular event that you haven't trained for, see, the men have trained for this. They know what they're doing, but she has not. She doesn't know what it means to be kidnapped. She doesn't know what it means to walk barefoot, uh, as well as be blindfolded and tied up. She doesn't understand this. She has no real agency until she has to find someone to help her. So the walk, standing in conflict. So we're at a hockey ring. This is the discussion after the bank robbery, and Doug here in the jacket with the B on it has to manage conflict. The main conflict is James, who is sitting in black, Jeremy Renner, ends up the one taking Claire hostage. Well, that affects their dynamic because Des in green asks right before James comes in, "Are we taking hostages now?" So there's some sort of indication that they've been doing this for a while, and there has been no deviation beyond um, just receiving the plans for the robbery, going to the target location, conducting the robbery, and then getting out in a timely manner. So when you have James interrupting that sort of process, that standard, a person who doesn't like rules. So even in this dynamic, he doesn't like rules. The rule is to get in and get out without much fuss or fanfare. That's not what James cares about. James cares about chaos, creating chaos, fostering conflict, even if he wants to manage the family business by having Doug be with his sister Chris. He doesn't care anything about that. He doesn't care about his particular actions affecting everyone else, because then that calls attention to them. So then what he does, he gets the purse from Claire when they are actually in the truck. And so here's where he is bringing Claire's ID to the group, which now creates even more conflict. And so he's suggesting that he needs to handle it, but then Doug actually snatches the ID out of his hand and saying that he's going to handle it. And the thing is that's very striking about this, about their dynamic, is that when Doug says, "I'm going to handle it," James says, "Well, I'm going to get it done." And there's a difference between handling something and finishing something off. And James is already sort of bragging about how he took out somebody on behalf of Doug because the guy was going to come and shoot Doug. So James decides to kill the guy himself, which earned him 9 years in prison. And so James is the type of person who believes he gets stuff done. He doesn't just handle something, because when you handle something, there's the option of taking your hands off of it, or there's the option of considering it more than you need to. James assesses the situation, realizes that the situation can no longer continue, and his solution is just to kill it, or get rid of it. Not Doug. Doug handles the situation. He manages this conflict here on purpose so that Claire is not hurt. Whether or not he's already emotionally invested in Claire is up for debate. But there's something in Doug that wants to pull at Claire and doesn't want James to get at her, because he knows that if James gets at her, Claire is dead. So we have the lure playing with conflict. This is Chris, James's sister, played by Blake Lively, and she's interesting character. She's a drug mule for the florist, and she gets a package, takes a package to. She gets the package from A, takes a package to B, and then she gets her money from C, which is the florist. The Chris here is a character who looks like she always has something in mind. She looks like she always has some kind of scheme or plan or something that she's looking to have an opportunity with. When she finally walks over to sit near Doug at the bar, and they're all at the bar, she tries to put a little drugs in his drink. He's not drinking an alcoholic drink, and it looks like, or by the way they talk, that he's sober. He doesn't want to do drugs anymore, oxy or anything like that. And so she's trying to push something on him without asking him. And then their conversation gets into sort of like um, a racial animus type conversation. She's mad that the Somalis are uh, talking smack, right? And she says there's no serious white people um, in Charlestown. And so there's some kind of conversation, there's some sort of experience with Chris that we don't get a full fleshing out to see really what she thinks about the environment around her, what she thinks about being Irish, what she thinks about being a mother. We get some visualizations of it, but we don't really get a full fleshing out of Krista, more than when she's upset and she feels like she needs to retaliate. So with her, it's she's playing with conflict in the sense that she's playing with Doug, um, sort of stretching out their situation and not moving towards some kind of resolution. It isn't until she realizes that Doug is going to leave with Claire that she makes an appeal herself. She makes an appeal for herself. Hey, take me with you. But all this time that she's known Doug, she's been around Doug, she's had an opportunity to pursue Doug or let Doug pursue her. She waits too long. So her conflict is waiting too long, thinking Doug will always be an option. For Doug, playing around with Krista, because right after this, he's going to have sex with her. It's a quickie. It's nothing more than just a few moments, and then she's gone and out the door. She doesn't sit down. She doesn't make him a drink. He doesn't offer her anything, um, food or anything like that. It's just with them, it's some sort of convenience. So he plays with conflict because if you don't want the person, why keep playing around with the person? And so they play with each other, but towards the end of the movie, he's making a decision to no longer play with her, and be with someone else. So Doug has stalked, in a sense, but we would call it surveillance. Claire, she's actually in the laundromat. And so this is the visit, watching conflict. And now um, this is Doug's perspective, whereas we saw with Claire lying on the floor, that was her perspective. So he's been sort of watching Claire for a while. He knows her address because of the ID card, the driver's license, but he hasn't approached her or anything like that. This is his first time approaching the conflict, but he doesn't make himself known. He doesn't say hi to anybody. He acts like or performs as if he is in the laundromat to do laundry. So his perspective now is to continue watching her to see, um, just to see who she is, right? Just to see her ongoing. It's almost like he's trying to court conflict in a sense, right? This is a person who has information about all four men, but she doesn't know their faces, and she claims later in a scene that if she had to hear their voices again, she could remember them. But she sat near Doug multiple times, on different dates in his house. I mean, in her house, and she still didn't recognize his voice. So Doug's perspective of Claire is going to be challenged in a sense, because when she finishes unloading or getting her clothes out of the washer, she passes the woman sitting in the chair. She passes multiple tables, and she comes to where Doug sits. Doug is pretending to watch a newspaper, but he kind of looks at her out the corner of her eye. And when she comes up to him, she asks him, "Are you doing laundry?" And he looks at her strangely, because they are actually in a laundromat. Why wouldn't he also um, be doing exactly the same thing as everybody else? It's a strange question. And so he's shocked, and then she says, well, she asks him about quarters, if he had any quarters, right? Because the machine is out, and he says, no, I can't help you. And then she turns around and said, okay, well, I'll just hang my clothes up at home. The interesting thing for her to sort of almost have this weird kind of half conversation, as if they're kind of drawn to each other in a strange sense, as if their connection, because if you remember the connection at the beginning, there is some kind of connection. She doesn't recognize it, but he knows something about her that she doesn't know. And so this encounter between them leads to him her crying, because she's folding clothes that has some blood on them from the previous bank robbery. And so she's triggered. She's not triggered by his voice. She's triggered by the blood that's on the collar of her shirt. And then he tries to console her. So somewhere in him, he's triggered. He's triggered to respond to her emotionally. Whatever is now, we understand that he knows why he's actually triggered and why he's responding to her emotionally. But something in Claire could be, maybe some previous encounter. It could be his desire, his guilt, his desire to try to console someone that who he previously hurt. But the conversation leads to him asking her out on a date. First, he jokes a little bit and says, "I cry at nail salons," or something like that. She responds in kind by laughing at his joke, and then he later says, that, "Let me take you out." And so she doesn't know who he is. She just met this man right at the laundromat, and all of a sudden she's going out on a date with him, like a real date with him. And so now he gets to watch her and continue to figure out who she is, and then how he's going to handle it after that. And this is him handling it in contrast to what James would do. So they're on a date. Now he's courting conflict. And I think there are probably one or two times where he's on a date. This is not the very first one. The first date is where they are talking about where he works, and the people in the community calling her a toonie. That was the first date. This works like a second date. And the second date is essentially she telling him that the FBI was asking her some more questions, and she remembered that one of the men had a tattoo on his neck. It was a Fighting Irish. Now Doug knows who that person is. It's James. He's the one who has the tattoo on his neck. And so he goes through the process of kind of telling her or advising her on what to do because she doesn't want to testify. And so he goes through this process of saying, well, you could go on ahead and turn them in, but of course it's going to affect you negatively because you're going to be the one who ends up having to go into witness protection. Your whole life is going to be turned upside down, which is a bit of irony because this is the person who is sitting in front of her who turned her life all around, who literally turned her life upside down, and he's managing himself uh in a sense that he there isn't anything in him that wants to tell her, hey, we were the ones who robbed you, don't tell on us. What he does, kind of like a predator, a prey and prey type situation. A lion, I've always said, when you watch the National Geographic episodes, you see the male lion laying down. He and it looks like he's asleep, but he's really not asleep. What he's doing is he's assessing the situation. Which prey will he be able to run after and catch and eat? In this situation, I feel like it's almost the same thing, that this is kind of like a predator trying to figure out what the prey knows, almost conducting an interrogation in the same way that Doug and all of the other men go through an interrogation after the second bank robbery. It is almost like he's conducting an interrogation of Claire. Now she's forthcoming without him really having to ask a lot of information. That's women for us. We talk a lot more than we listen. But he's great at listening because then he knows how to respond. Then he knows what the FBI are doing, because the first day when she tells him about what happened to her at the bank robbery, um, and then she mentions that the FBI is on it, and he's shocked, and he asks her, "So, do you have someone come by, check up on you, or something like that?" And so, in essence, they could be under surveillance, right? And he doesn't know it. So the more that she talks about the situation, the more that he engages her, courts her as if they are in a relationship, the more that he can gain more information. So he advises her that she could tell, but she's going to have to give up her whole life and go into witness protection. And then he pauses, and then he gets to the next advice. And the advice is essentially, well, you don't have to say anything right now because she holds all the cards, and that she doesn't have to tell the FBI everything. And so then she says to him in response, okay, you're quite the expert. And then he kind of said, no, not really, I just watch a lot of CSI. And it gets into like a joking situation, and then he finally seals it with I watch Bones too, which leads her to laugh even more. So now they're like in a relationship. It's almost like they are getting to a point where the connection is building, but he's still courting conflict. So Claire tells him after that date what happened to her. Her car was vandalized, and she now has to walk through the projects. Well, while she was walking through the projects, men were harassing her, throwing bottles at her, and what that suggests to me is that she looks like an outsider. She looks like the out. If anything, she seemed to blend in more when she was the assistant bank manager in a suit in her context. But when she's out of her context, she doesn't look like the professional that she was while she was in the bank. In fact, her whole dress changes, her whole costuming changes all throughout the movie. So she tells Doug what happens, and so then he goes to the apartment where James is watching TV. Looks like he's bored. James doesn't seem to have a job, and he tells James, "Okay, I need some help. We need to go hurt somebody, and I can't tell you about it." And so Doug is acting like a protective boyfriend now. They go to the apartment of the men who were throwing bottles at Claire, and we don't know how they found out this information, but they go back and it's a payback situation. Is getting involved in conflict. So don't forget that Doug is already in a conflict type position, sitting across from the person he victimized. Now he's getting James involved in the conflict and is mad when James go too far. James always goes too far. He gets James involved and then criticizes James for how far he goes, knowing that James is the type of person he's going to do much more in the situation. So here, both men fight the other men in the apartment. Doug knows how to pull himself out of it, but James goes further. After beating the other guy, goes to the guy that Doug was fighting, questions him, kind of like interrogates him, and asks him, "What did you do to my friend, to my brother?" And so, and then he pulls out a gun, puts it before the man's face, and the guy kept saying, "Just chill, just chill, just chill." And James is saying, "Don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me to chill." And so then he still wants to know what he did to Doug, but the guy is saying, "I don't know what you're talking about." And James decides that he's going to shoot him twice. Shoot him twice. He doesn't kill him, he just shoots him in the leg. Not and the thing is, he's shooting and not paying attention to the fact that he's in an apartment. That bullet could go down to the next floor. Somebody could hear the gunshots. There's a number of factors here where you see James he's just going to be a loneman. He's just going to do whatever he wants to do. But you have to say something about Doug. You can't have it both ways. You can't get James involved in something and then turn around and get mad because he's involved in something in the way that he likes to get involved in something. And we're going to see that later when they are at a fence across from a community college, and Doug says to James about how he shot somebody on his behalf. "I didn't ask you to do that." And so Doug picks and chooses how he's going to use James to do his bidding, but then turn around and criticize his actions. So here we see James coming along to check up on how Doug is handling it. Because remember, at the beginning at the hockey ring, James says, "I'm going to get it done," meaning that he's going to settle the situation so that it is not a situation, it's no longer a threat. Not Doug. It's almost like Doug wants to keep Claire for himself. So this is the checkup, and this is kind of like both. This is James checking up on Doug and how Doug handles the conflict that is called, or who is called Claire. And see, what you see in this dynamic is Doug lying to James, which could also translate as some form of betrayal. He's not telling him the full truth. He's keeping it close to the vest because, and somewhere in his mind, Doug has already connected fully to Claire, and he wants to keep Claire to himself. But James is different in this regard because he doesn't assess himself as making hasty decisions. He assessed the situation as not as even though he made the decision, it should not really affect him. Just because he made a hasty decision doesn't mean that the decision should affect him negatively. All he has to do is pull out a gun and shoot somebody, and it's done. He gets it done. Whereas with Doug, is a little bit more contemplative, more thoughtful, more considerate. Even if he victimizes Claire, he along with the other crew, he still doesn't want to see her dead because he knows enough of history of James of what he will do. So all Doug ends up doing is proving to James that there is a difference between the two. One will handle conflict and one will get it done. So now we're in the FBI office, the classroom, learning about the conflict. And the conflict, of course, is the bank robbery, and they're trying to find out who the people are. And what I thought was interesting about this scene versus something that is not existent within the story, within the narrative, is that we get an education when we get to the agents, the FBI agents. We get a whole classroom. We get a whole thought-provoking outlining of all of the individual characters, their backgrounds, what were some of the contributing factors to their lives. James' mother um, dies by HIV. His father is killed in prison. Uh, we get some information about Dez, that he works for Vericom as a systems tech. We get information about Albert McGlone, that he knows how to jack your car, but by the time way before you found your keys. And then this is where Agent Frawley, who is played by John Hamm, is standing there and telling us that these bank robberies are not organized by just one, or not organized by someone who doesn't understand how to do things, and that he's the one who labels Doug the architect. That it's not all of these other flipperheads that that Fergie calls them. It's not the flipperheads. It's Doug who is the architect, and he was the one who had an opportunity twice to play professional hockey, and he messed it up. Actually robbed someplace and did some time. And so I thought this was interesting because when you look at us being in this classroom as the watchers of this, as the viewers of this film, we feel educated. But when we see Doug and the rest of the crew conduct robberies and we see their skill and expertise, we don't get an education. The only time that we probably get just a little bit of an education is when the last robbery, the last robbery, which is the ballpark robbery, Fergie gives them the blueprints, and then he tells them that he has an inside man, and the inside man has a gambling weakness, a gambling sickness, and he's sort of going to facilitate them getting into the ballpark and getting access to a certain location, and then he leaves it off there. But we don't get a full sort of understanding of how is it that they know how to do these things. And we just have to assume that because they had fathers or parents or whoever who showed them how to do stuff, especially Fergie, who showed them how to do something, that maybe that's how they learned how to conduct a robbery. So I think that's a big difference. This is where James feels some form of betrayal. This is the lunch break, finding out about conflict. And remember, Claire is the conflict. And to be honest about it, it is James who creates her truly as a conflict. Even though you have Doug at the beginning creating conflict as a result of him robbing the bank, he and the other three men, when James takes Claire hostage, he immediately creates a conflict because now they're going to have to watch their backs. So Doug is having lunch with Claire. She's on her lunch break. And it's just a simple thing out here on the patio, and they're eating some pizza or something like that. They're having a conversation, and she tells him about her sunny days, and the sunny days refers to her younger sibling dying from cancer. And when she looks out, and she sees sunny days, it reminds her of someone dying. And so that's going to be very significant at the end of the movie, because when they come to her house to stake out her house to see if Doug is going to show up, she changes her position from supporting the rules and and being loyal to rulemaking to siding with Doug when she tries to warn him using the term sunny days. So here James is very surprised. He didn't know that he was sort of that Doug was sort of in contact with Claire. For all intents and purposes, he said he handled it. So why is he now sitting at a lunch table with Claire? So James gets into performative mode. He asks questions. What did she do? He mentions the bank robbery and says, from a general standpoint, oh yeah, I heard that bank got robbed. But here it is, Claire still doesn't know that the two people sitting in front of her are the two people who robbed the bank. So there's some sort of emotional triggering with her that she is almost deaf, dumb, and blind in a sense that she can't even recognize the voice. Now, would it be impossible for her to recognize the voices, right? Given that they had costumes and their mouths were covered, yes, sure, it's going to be impossible. However, people have mannerisms. People have ways in which they stand, how they get side by side to you, how they communicate with you, and she still hasn't caught on. And so now what he's actually afraid of, what Doug is actually afraid of, is Claire seeing the tattoo on James's neck. Because the tattoo is the Fighting Irish, and he's afraid that she's going to see that neck. And once she sees that, she's going to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is at least one of the people who came in to rob the bank. So this lunch break works like almost a break in the film too, in a sense that it reveals the betrayal. It reveals the fact that Doug can't be trusted because he lied to James and said that he handled it. But no, he did not handle it. And even as he's about to leave, he says, he tells Claire, "Don't get used to your life of leisure here. Doug is always taking his work home with him," which suggests that Doug was supposed to leave the elements of the bank robbery uh, at the bank robbery and don't take it with him, which is ironic because isn't that what James did? He was supposed to leave. You get in, you do the robbery, you get out. You don't take anybody along with you because that's like taking your work home with you. So we get some fear. This is the standoff, standing on conflict. It's almost like these two men are about to duel it out, but he's actually leaving because he just needs to leave, of course. And so this is almost like a standoff, and it's almost like even though we know that Doug is maybe preoccupied with the ideal of not revealing himself and not revealing um, James, and we see the tattoo on his neck. And so he's more concerned about that. That's why he puts his hand around his neck and tells him, okay, brother. And then James says, okay, I'll see you at home. He's more preoccupied with that. He's trying to block knowledge. He's trying to block revelation. He's trying to block discovery because if Claire sees it, it's a wrap. Whether she picks it up quickly or not, it's going to be in her brain and she's going to see it and she's going to respond. She could have a nightmare. She could be at the job and it just hits her or whatever. So this is on the surface, this is two men dueling it out, but really Doug trying to hide the truth about something. But it's also, you could also look at it as Doug standing on conflict, meaning that he's going to stand in protection of Claire, that he's not going to give her up. And through their eye movements and through their stares, he's that she belongs to him and he can't touch her. That now he has gotten so far into a protective mode with Claire that he's willing to oppose his friend, his brother that he grew up with. So this is the standoff standing on conflict. So here's where this is the argument confronting conflict. Conflict. This is where James comes along and tells Doug that the next robbery is a very big robbery, and it's really big, and it's going to net them a lot of money. And Doug is basically saying, "I don't want any parts of it." He wants to put the town in his rear view mirror. He's tired. He doesn't want to do it anymore. And you see here almost a parent-child dynamic. Doug is not the parent in this situation, however. It is James who is sort of for trying to act like that he has agency over Doug, that he has every right to tell Doug how to think, what he's going to think, even pushing Chris on him. And Doug has to repeatedly say, "The child is not my child," as James insinuates that the child that Chris has is not Doug's child. But James keeps wanting to push this idea of family, and we all need to stay together, and we all need to come together, and essentially you need to just go on ahead and marry my sister and we can be family. Because at this point, remember that James is an outsider, a visitor to his family unit. Both their fathers knew each other. One died in prison. I don't know if they were in prison at the same time, but one died in prison. But Doug's father is still alive. And so Doug comes in to this family dynamic as a child because he needs somewhere to stay. And I just have to assume that because they took agency over Doug, that he didn't have to go to child services or something like that. From that point, and we don't know the ages, whether or not they are the same age, but from that point of Doug having to come into their house for safety as a child because his father was taken away, it seems like um, James stepped into a fatherly role without asking Doug if he wanted a father. Doug's father, again, is still alive. He doesn't need a father. And so, what is interesting also about this dynamic is that James doesn't talk about Claire anymore throughout the movie from here. So, I'm assuming that the standoff worked because James doesn't try to go after Claire. He doesn't try to stalk Claire. He doesn't try to show up at Claire's apartment and try to get her to leave Doug alone. Something about this dynamic and something about the previous where there was a standoff that James got a clue. Now it could be through the editing of the movie that they left out some aspect of James maybe continued efforts and trying to get Doug to understand it, because the scene right after the standoff, Doug goes in and confronts James and asks him um, if he's been watching Claire. And James says, "No, I just spotted the avalanche, which was which is his truck." And so James makes it out to be like, "No, I wasn't. I haven't been looking for her. I just saw your truck downtown, and I decided to come up behind you." I don't believe it. I believe James has been watching the whole time. We just don't see him watching. We don't see through the camera action, and we don't know because the movie has been edited. So he could have been watching the whole time. He could have been surveilling too. But what you see here is after that standoff, you do not see James asking about Claire anymore, all throughout the rest of the movie. And I don't know what the minutes count is, but you don't see it anymore. So something about the standoff, something about some kind of facial feature, some facial way that Doug looked at James basically told him to back off. So right here, these are two people having a conversation. They get into a yell, and then they actually fight. Here's the result of them fighting. So the decision, which is ignoring conflict, the decision here is Doug saying he said it a little bit before this, right before they had a fight, that um, he's putting this town in his rearview mirror. And it's interesting how they are fighting right in front of a graveyard, and across the street from this location is the Bunker Hill Community College. So it's interesting how there's a learning institution across the way and a death place right in front of them. I don't know what that actually means, but it's kind of like right in front of the bars, because we're going to see in a minute, the both of them are sort of leaning on bars. They're both stuck. They're both used to the confining conditions of where they are. And so the best way to do is to shoot and fight, or to rob, or to lie, or betray, go to die, because in front of them is death. What you see in James facing it is sort of like a foreshadowing of what's going to happen to him at the end of the movie when he actually dies, when he goes toe to toe, shot for shot with the police, with the FBI, and then they end up killing him. But you see with Doug, his back to death. And so that's also a foreshadowing, because at the end of the movie, he doesn't die. He flees to Florida, and he's looking out on the water, and it's sort of like a peaceful situation. So the decision, ignoring conflict, the decision for them, they have two different types of decisions. One is facing death, and one is not facing death. But they also don't give us a view of the community college, in the sense that they could also face life. They could also face a new understanding of things. They don't want to do that. So we see James left over. He's sitting in front of the bars, and for me, he's stuck in conflict. Not only do you have bars, but you have wired fencing. Then you have this gun that he has in his hand, which could mean some, contemplative action or something like that. But right across the way is the college. It's in blurred form, but it spells college. And so college is at the back of him, which suggests to me that he can get out of his condition. He can get out of his condition. He's facing bars, and he could turn around and face education. He could face something new. James doesn't want to learn anything new. It doesn't matter if they get caught. It doesn't matter if he kidnaps. It doesn't matter if he inconveniences all the people around him. The procrastination around learning, I've always said that procrastination is sort of inconveniencing other people around you. You procrastinating your learning process. There's something that you need to learn. James would rather continue to be stuck in conflict, and it's basically conflict with himself. But he says at the end of the right before the end of the movie, right before they get to the ballpark robbery, that he can't go back to prison. He spent 9 years. And in the previous slide, uh, Doug was saying that I didn't ask you to do that. I didn't ask you to kill that man who was on his way to kill me. But James took a paternalistic strategy and killed somebody to keep from someone killing Doug. Doug seems ungrateful. And you see here in the stress of a man who's been acting like a primary caregiver or father figure to Doug, the tiredness. There's this conflict with his friend, his brother, that just cannot be resolved. Doug wants to leave. That's it. And it's interesting that even though he takes out the gun, he doesn't shoot Doug. Even though the place where they are standing, where he's sitting right now, he shot the person who was going to come and shoot Doug, but he doesn't shoot Doug. Whether that means that he has respect for Doug, it's kind of like besides the point, but it's something to note that he doesn't try to shoot Doug to keep him from leaving. So somewhere he's made peace with the idea, or he figures that he has to make peace with the idea that Doug is leaving. So the men are sitting in the florist shop. This is the friendship sustaining relationship conflict. All of them are in conflict, even if they are all in agreement. They are all in agreement with conducting robberies and the under the direction of Fergie. But they are also in conflict because one is a work. Dad's on the end at the very end with the light blue has never been in jail before, but he's going to end up dying in the film. James in the black next to Dez has been to prison before, uh, and he has nothing to lose. He don't want to go back to prison, so he would rather die. Doug right there in the red and blue, navy blue, is tired of this. He sees the situation for what it actually really is. He's sort of like the person representing truth, even though he's a lie, and even though he's a liar. He's the scapegoat person that we've always said that the scapegoat person is the person who really knows or sees everybody for who they are. So Fergie um, is standing in front of them, talking about how when he looks at them, he feels like he's still in the trenches. Fergie is much older than them, and so he's no longer robbing anybody. He's sort of facilitating. He gets information. He tells them about the information. They do the robberies, and then they bring him his cut. So he's almost like a franchise, right? He franchises robbery through these men, and so then you see Albert McGlone, who's actually who's been in trouble with the law, but he is just as acquiescent as the other three men, except Doug. Doug has to perform acquiescence. So all the other three men, Albert, James, Des, they're acquiescent. Somewhere on their journey of life, from childhood, young adulthood, and on, they've made a decision that this is their life. This is what they're going to do. The only two people who work on a job are Des and Doug, which is irony because they work on a job. They don't need anything else. So maybe I don't know why they're in it. Maybe for the thrill of it. But Albert, James, and Des are acquiescent. They acquiesce to Fergie. I guess they understand the underlying assumptions of dealing with Fergie or a person like Fergie. Doug is the one who is performing acquiescence. I believe right when they threatened Claire's life, that he made a decision that it was time to go. He didn't tell anybody. He didn't say anything about anything or whatever, but he knew in his mind. So that's really, to me, that's really what's going on with him. That he's contemplating how he's going to do it, when he's going to do it, how it's all going to happen. And I also believe that this is where he makes a decision to kill Fergie. Because if he doesn't kill Fergie, he can't leave. James doesn't kill Doug to keep him from leaving. But Doug knows that he has to kill Fergie in order for him to leave. Otherwise he's staying. He's gonna stay within the bars of that community, and he already said he wants to leave. So he visits his father. They are having the talk, and it's about hiding conflict. And here they're having an interesting conversation. He's visiting his father behind bars, which suggests that he has some kind of loyalty to his father. He loves his father. I don't know if love is the right word, but they kind of joke a little bit because he's saying, every time I come and see you, it's always the red pajamas. So they have some kind of play with each other, even though the father had to leave when he was young. Somehow the way that they converse with each other, as if his father is not really in prison and that he's just having a phone conversation. One is in one area of the house or one area of the community in his own house, and One is in another area of the community in his own house. So their relationship is kind of different because interesting because he's the only father in the film. He's the only father. There are many men in the film, but it seems like he's the only father, and he's a father who is behind bars. Fergie sort of acts like a father, and then you have James acting like a father, but he's the true father. He's the father that Doug knows where he is. He knows where his parent is. He knows where he is. He can go and visit him. He can talk to him. He can't talk. He can't hug him, right? He can't touch him or anything like that. So the connection is broken, but together at the same time. It's weird. It's interesting that their connection is beyond the bars in a sense that Doug wants to break his connection to James while they are sitting near bars. Doug wants to maintain his connection with his father while his father is behind bars. And then you have the bars that were behind Doug that was facing the the cemetery. So it's a very interesting dynamic. Um, but what you have here is a talk that they are having about Doug's mother and what happened to her. And he asks her right before he's about to leave, right when we hear the 5 minute the security guard saying you have 5 minutes. He asks her, he asks him, why didn't you go look for her? And then the father's like, look for who? My mother, Doug says. And so then the father is frustrated by that question. We get later what happened to the mother, and we're going to talk about that in the next slide, what happened to the mother. But the father is frustrated. He doesn't, here it is, he's sitting in a prison cell, and he got life, and this young son wants to come and talk about something that was in the past that he's already made peace with it. He's already said it. He said it too right here in this scene that he's already made peace with it. He said, I didn't go look for her because there was nothing to find. And he characterizes the situation as women who are young and pregnant, don't want to take care of their kids, running around, all that kind of stuff. And so there's the implication that he's talking about Doug's mother. But we're going to find out that it's much more than that, what happened, and that the father is sort of like a contributing factor as to why that happened. But it's interesting that he's so frustrated that he wants to get out of the situation as quickly as possible, way before the 5 minute count. And he gets up and I'll see you later. I forget how he says it. This side of the other or something like that. And then while he's standing at the security doors, he's frustrated and slams them and walks on out. And Doug is left still sort of emotionally triggered, turned around by the situation. This situation triggers him just as much as any other situation, because when Claire asks him about his mother or about his parents and they're sitting in the community garden, he's triggered. He says, I don't know what happened to my mother. She just left. She just abandoned us. And she didn't want to be my mother anymore. So he just let it go. Right. And that's just as much as triggering, but he feels like he has to explain it because the person sitting in front of him is a person that he victimized, and he wants to care. He wants to take some time to run through a conversation. Whereas with Chris, there's no intimacy. They have sex, of course, but there's no intimacy. With Claire, it's a building of a relationship that's building towards some sort of intimacy, and they actually end up having sex and everything like that. But the sex doesn't mean intimacy. Intimacy means revealing who you are and being vulnerable and telling someone about your past and having them to make a good judgment call or something, not being afraid to know more than what the person is saying at that time. So this is a talk, and he's hiding conflict. The father is actually hiding conflict because the conflict is really, he's the one that sort of contributed to his wife or Doug's mother um, leaving or or abandoning Doug. So we're at the florist, and I call him the father caregiver conflict, because he acts like a father to all the men, to all the community men whose fathers, who Fergie here has contributed to them going to prison or dying. Um, he's the one who's sort of, when Doug's father, who is Big Mac, says he wants to get out of the game, and well, not necessarily get out of the game, but he wants to do his own thing. He wants to be like a Fergie. Fergie got upset and said no, basically he couldn't, and pumped drugs into him, and pumped drugs into Big Mac's wife or girlfriend, who is Dougie's mother, and so she ended up uh, committing suicide. So that's what I mean when Big Mac is the one who ends up sort of contributing to Doug's mother abandoning him, because in this lifestyle, if you can call it a lifestyle, you support only one figure, and that one figure is in charge. Anytime you think about wanting to do something on your own, it's always going to have a negative impact on the person who's already in charge. It's like you want to you want to take business from me when I'm the one who's paying you and giving you business. I'm giving you a cut of, I'm giving you a cut of every drug you sell, every bank you rob, every cash truck, and now you want to leave me. You want your own thing. And so the Fergie being a pseudo father comes with a lot of manipulation, psychology triggering, um, predatory behavior. It comes with more than just him being the leader of everybody. He, somewhere in his own childhood, he felt like he had to take, or he was permitted to take. He felt like um, that whatever was going on in his childhood, when he grew up, he was not gonna let anybody hurt him. So all these people coming in and telling him that they want to go their own way, Doug comes in at this particular time and tells him uh, that he doesn't want to do the ballpark robbery, and that get some other man to do it. And this is where he says that I'm not going to get some. Um, you think I'm going to trust some flipperhead to do it? No, you guys are a unit. There's no one without the other, and so you're going to work together. And then Doug gets upset in the same way that he got upset uh, with James. Like, who do you think you are? Um, you think you're the only one with a gun in Charlestown, right? And he's basically saying, I'm not working for you. And in this case, this is where he begins to threaten Claire, because he's saying that he knows about some girl that he's been hanging out with. The thing is that what we find out in those words is that somebody has been watching Doug in the same way that Doug is watching Claire, and I believe James was watching Doug. Fergie was watching Doug as well. I also believe that James is the one who told Fergie about Claire as a way to try to get him to do the bank robbery. And so that when he comes and talks to him at the gates, he doesn't reveal that information. Now that's not confirmed. That's just my suggestion. But how is it that a man who's concerned about uh, trying to do his robberies concerned about one individual person? Well, you can answer that question because he is the leader. Doug is the leader of the whole group. And so once you strike the leader, it's like a shepherd. Once you strike the shepherd, the sheep will flee. So if Doug is not doing it, if Doug is not the leader, the architect of the whole thing, it's going to affect the dynamics of everyone else. But you see this sort of dynamic with Doug and James, like James wants to be in charge. Eventually, I feel like that was going to be an issue. So this is the father caregiver conflict. This is the appeal, desperation, and conflict. So here it is. She's scrambling here. Dez, I think Dez is the one who told her where he was, and this is the motel or hotel near the ballpark that they're going to work from in terms of going to the ballpark to rob it. And so she brings her baby Cheyenne with her, and she asks him what. She tells him that she wants to go with him. So that means it's confirmed. It's confirmed that he's leaving. It's confirmed that he's leaving. Now, we don't see him telling her before this scene that he's leaving. So that means that somebody is working behind his back to try to get him to stay. So remember, James is not going to shoot Doug to keep him to stay. But to me, it seems like he told Fergie and then he told Krista here. Because how does she know? How did she know that he's leaving? The only encounter that they have had was the sex encounter and then the barbecue, but she wasn't necessarily having close communication with him. They were just all at a barbecue having a conversation and eating barbecue. So how does she know that he's leaving? Now remember, again, the film is edited, so there may be a scene prior to this one where she finds out, but we have to assume and it is implied that it is James who tells her that he's leaving. So she comes here to make her appeal. To me, her appeal is more desperation and scrambling. She had all that time from the beginning of the movie, per se. She had all that time to make her feelings known to Doug that she wants to be with him. Somewhere she hasn't told him that. Now, he might have made up his mind that he was never going to be with her anyway, but for her to still pull at him suggests that there was something still with him. Their connection works like a soul tie. She don't want to leave him alone. He don't want to leave her alone, but she don't want him. But in her coming to this motel, she wants him. And so it's almost like a triangle, even though the film doesn't necessarily triangulate Doug, Chris, and Claire. It almost works like that. It's the other woman coming to make her feelings known, when in reality Claire could be may be perceived as the other woman as well. So she makes her appeal. She says that she could be better, that she would do whatever she wanted him to do. Just tell her what she wants him to do. And then he says to her, I'm going with someone else. And then she gets upset and she says, well, where is she then? If you're going with her, where is she? Um, and so that's a very good question, because a person, if you believe that the person that you want to be with is a person that can go with you, where is she? Why can't they go on ahead and leave? Doug has plenty of money. He could have left a long time ago. It's interesting that he waited so long to decide to leave. So she gets upset, moves about, and she talks about how there's a rope around her neck. And so she reveals first that something about the Tiffany necklace that she got from Agent Frawley, who was kind of mocking her. So throughout, he said in the bar, all these years you've been together, has he ever bought you a Tiffany necklace? And so from that conversation, it's implied that he's trying to tell her that he bought some other woman a Tiffany necklace, which Claire never puts on. She never puts on that necklace. Even when Agent Frawley comes to the house to sort of check and confirm if she's been in on the robbery with Doug too, he sees the necklace on the table, and from the movie, from her changing her clothes, it looked like the necklace has been there for at least a couple of days, and she never puts it on. And she had never found out about him yet or anything like that. But it's interesting that she never puts on. But she has this. But this person here is appealing to him, and she will put on a necklace. Very interesting. So this is where she says that there was a rope around her neck, betrayal and conflict. So now this works almost like a you reap what you sow type situation. It's going to be Krista, and no, we don't know for certain. It's not confirmed, but it's actually going to be Krista who's going to be the one who tells the FBI where Doug and his crew is. And so she feels like she had a rope around her neck that she felt like she had to betray, but she doesn't reveal what she did. She doesn't reveal what she says, because later in this same room, he's going to be looking out the window, almost like to check to see if the police are there. And James says, "Why are you doing this? You're making me nervous." Because Doug knows that, or Doug suspects that Chris said something. And the interesting thing that the rope around the neck is around Doug, Chris, and James. That Doug doesn't reveal what Chris says, uh, and Doug doesn't reveal to James the possibility of what Chris said. Chris, for all of his purposes, is basically suggesting that she turned in, or she gave the FBI people a heads up about their plans to rob the ballpark. Because think about it. Why do they end up at the ballpark? Nobody should know about the ballpark robbery but the four-man crew, Fergie, the inside man, and that's it. So how is it that they know to be out there in front like that? James is not going to reveal it. Dez is not going to reveal it. Albert McGlone is not going to reveal it. Doug is not going to reveal it, because he needs to be sure that he can do whatever he needs to do to get back to Claire so he can leave with Claire. So he's not going to create additional conflict to keep him from getting away, to keep him from getting to Claire. His goal is to get to Claire. So I feel like James told Chris about him being in the motel room. Chris told Agent Frawley about their plans for the ballpark robbery, because the whole force of FBI and Boston police people are out there waiting for them. So the betrayal and conflict is essentially that when she reveals, and we are still assuming, when she reveals the plan is going to affect her brother. And no, she doesn't expect her brother to die in the process. What she wants is for Doug not to leave. So James couldn't convince him to leave. So he tells Chris that he's going to leave, hoping that Chris will go there and try to convince him to stay. So now Chris is in a hospital. She has some drugs and alcohol in her, with the child with her, and Agent Frawley confronts her because he gets a call about her being in a wreck and being in the hospital. And he's trying to figure out what's going on with her. What do you want to tell me? And Chris makes a very interesting comment. She says, "Why am I always the one getting used? Why am I always the one being used?" Remember, Chris is a drug mule, or sort of like the interpretation of that. So she's being used by Fergie. She's being used by her brother. Even Doug says, "Why are you so concerned about Chris? All you care about is playing Xbox and and smoking drugs or something like that. Now you're so concerned about Chris because we don't see a relationship with Chris and her brother James. We don't see them talking. We don't see them in the house together. The only everyone is at the barbecue. That doesn't necessarily mean that Chris is having a relationship with her brother. Like a brother to sister, sister to brother relationship. So when she says, "Why am I always the one being used?" we have to assume that her brother is using her just as much as Fergie is using her, just as much as James is using her. You got three men at least who uses her. After the first bank, after the first bank robbery, when they're all in a bar and the four men are sitting at the table, and Dez, well, not three men first, and then Doug comes in, and then Dez says that Chris is over there. Chris was sitting over there. It's the beginning, the lure. Um, I believe that Dez is the one who actually likes Chris, but Chris can't see him because Chris works. I mean, because Dez works. And I believe he's the one. He's the one, I believe, who notices Chris. Doug doesn't care anything about Chris, but she wants to go with a person who's going to use her. Dez, I believe, actually does care about Chris because he's the one who acknowledges her. And so there is no conversation between Chris and Dez and Chris and Albert McGlone or Chris and her own brother. You don't even see James picking up Cheyenne, her daughter. All you see is the conflict relationship that she has with Doug, one at the beginning and one towards the end of the film. So she said, why am I the only one? Why am I always the only one being used? So Agent Frawley here is giving her a chance to do right, a chance to be a better person, a chance to tell them what's going on. Because the implication is if she doesn't do what she needs to do in this situation, she's gonna lose her daughter. He even makes a point about that, and she says, "Don't talk about my daughter," because he knows that she, in some form or fashion, is complicit in what's going on. And that's why I believe it is here where she tells them what happened, what's going on about the ballpark. But Chris saying, "Why am I always the one being used?" Uh, doesn't allow for her to take agency on herself. That she uses herself in order for herself to be used just as much as the people around her use her. So this is where another decision killed in conflict. This is the confirmation of James saying that he's not going back to prison. And he could have turned around when Agent Frawley was trying to get him to stop. He refused. And he could have done a better job of becoming uh, inconspicuous by going into an office building or something like that. He just refused because this was a Monday. The Fergie said after the haul from um, the ball game on Monday, it was going to be about 3 million. So this is working day. This is working time. This is not. So you had office buildings that were open. You had other locations. No, what he does is that he decides to hold his big bag of money, walk with it in the open. Just because he had on a cop uniform doesn't mean that he's not going to be perceived as a threat because he got his big bag on his back. He doesn't have like a duffel bag. This thing is huge. So you know something is in there. And so Frawley tries to pursue him to try to get him to stop. And then he calls him by name, James Coughlin. And then this is where he returns fire. So he makes it up in his mind. His decision is a decision that he made up in his mind way before, um, way much earlier in the movie, um, that he cannot go back to prison. His conflict is the conflict with having to return to prison if he's arrested. And so instead of facing that conflict head on and going to prison again for another 9 years, he decides um, to create the chaos he's been creating throughout this whole film. This shooting that you see him doing is something that he's been doing from the very beginning. He doesn't he doesn't think with a level head. He doesn't think all the time that he's sitting in the house being bored and playing Xbox games. He doesn't think. He doesn't reflect. Like I said, like I noted that his back is to a community college across the way. But if he turned around and looked at the building, something on the inside of him might change. Something on the inside of him might be triggered. He doesn't care about that. This is what he cares about. He's the boredom that he feels. He feels alive when he's doing this type of thing here, shooting like this. He does this while they are actually in the ballpark parking garage. Um, um, he does this in other robberies. He there's something dead on the inside of him that needs to be triggered and needs to be able to um, exercise some sort of agency over someone else's life. So he's killed in conflict. This is the payback. So eye for eye conflict is your vengeance. So it's automatic. Here it is. His Fergie's words are coming back to bite him. He talked about clipping the nuts of Doug's father, and then clipping Doug's nuts if he decides not to go ahead with the robbery. And so now Doug has him on the ground. He had already shot the security person with him, the bodyguard with him, and so now he's back here in the florist shop. And so they both have a shootout with each other. This works like the resolution of killing a particular conflict so that he can go forward. And he whispers to Fergie about clipping his nuts, and so basically he shoots him. Doug feels compelled to do this. In his mind, he doesn't have any other choice. Once Fergie threatened Claire, and once Fergie revealed what he did to Doug's mother to dope her up proper, as he said, leading to her to go commit suicide and hanging herself, Doug feels compelled to do eye for eye, to pay him back. But I don't always believe that it is because he hurt his mother or he contributed to his father going to prison for life. I believe, or even Claire, even not even really Claire, I believe that he shoots him so he can be free. Because if he decides to let him go, Fergie is going to come after him. He can move to Florida, and remember, Doug tells James about Florida. So that means I believe James, who wants to be accepted by Fergie, told him about Florida, told Fergie about Florida. So everybody knows on some level that Doug wants to go to Florida. So it wouldn't be hard to find Doug. So in shooting him, I don't believe it has anything to do with any of the other contributing factors. I believe that he is shooting Fergie for himself. He got to get out of this town. He got to go somewhere else so he can be not necessarily a better person, but he definitely don't want to be the person that he is there. So this is the resolution, leaving conflict, and this is the area of Florida. We don't have like a card on the screen that basically said that he's in Florida, but we have to assume that it's in Florida. He's a much more relaxed individual. He's grown out his beard. He's grown out his hair. He has his hands in his pockets. Um, he doesn't necessarily, um, he does try to appeal to Claire to go with him. The problem with that, though, is they end up staking her house after the robbery, and so he can't go along and come. He can't take her along. It's interesting though. You know that there isn't much love there. There's just connection because Doug doesn't try to come back and get her because after some time she returns to the community garden to do the community stuff, to plant flowers and things like that, and then she finds the bag in the dirt with money in it, with a note, and then with a Florida orange. So we know that he's in Florida. And you could say that he cared about her in the sense that, oh, he was going to, he left something for her, and then she turns around and donates it for the hockey ring so the kids can have ice. And she donates it in the name of his mother named Doris McCrae. So he ends up fulfilling what it is that he wants to do, to resolve a particular conflict in himself. All these years he had that he could have left, he never left. And he comes face to face with the decision that it's time for me to go. No matter what, I don't care if you want to shoot me. Like he tells James, if you want to shoot me in the back. Because I'm leaving. I'm putting this whole town in my rearview mirror. And I talk about in another case study series with the town that he fulfills his goal. The goal is to leave. So, but for this particular presentation is about resolving conflict. He left all that conflict behind. We don't know what happened to Chris, but we do know what happened to Doug. Dez and Albert McGlone are dead. We don't know what happened to the rest of the agents, but they resolved their issues in terms of stop addressing the robbery situation and ended up killing James. But what we have here is an individual, a protagonist who leaves conflict and decides to stay away from conflict. Of course, we don't know what he's going to do with the rest of his life, but we do know that he is not going to be part of conflict. All right, this is the end of the presentation. So if you want to listen to other film analysis, just visit www.favorsfilmanalysis.com. Thank you very much for listening.